Peadar Maxwell joins me now, and Peadar is a senior psychologist with the HSC in primary care. Peadar, good evening to you. How are you?
Good evening to you, Eimear. I'm well, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm doing well.
You're enjoying the sunshine this evening?
Well, I'm down here in Wexford, and I hope it's like that in Carlow, Kilkenny, wherever you are, that it's just a beautiful evening and it makes everything better.
It surely does. And as we're thinking about some of the issues we're going to talk about this evening, anxiety among children, there is a lot, there are a lot of concerns parents will have and a lot of questions I'm sure you've been answering. But one thing I'm hearing from listeners is that they feel quite safe at the moment. They've been cocooning for so long that they're in their little bubble in their home. And for many families, the thoughts of coming out of the lockdown is quite daunting. How to get children back to school, feeling safe about that, eventually saying goodbye to them and leaving them back at the creche. I know we're a bit away from that, but are there any tools or tricks you can give us now as we kind of face the prospect of coming out of a lockdown?
Well, I suppose the thing that really hits me there is that it's not going to be just children nervous about coming out of lockdown or confinement. It's going to be the mammies and the daddies and grannies and granddads as well, worried about everybody. And what we have done really well as a society is we've kind of got people to love their lockdown and to love their cocoon, and they've gotten really used to confinement. And those people who had maybe no issue with anxiety before this, they maybe kind of got used to a quieter lifestyle, a more confined lifestyle. But those who had a sort of a propensity towards anxiety or really had a sense of anxiety before this ever happened, they've gotten, in many cases, to love lockdown, to get so used to having a much, much smaller world. And so what we would be saying to people is to be kind to yourself about this, to give yourself the time to get used to this. No lasting change happens quickly. Lasting change happens in little tiny steps. And just as we would try to make any kind of lifestyle change from, giving up something or taking up something, to do it in increments, to find ways that's meaningful for you. So I would be encouraging people to face their challenges, but to do them in nice small steps, and to even begin doing them now before they have to. So within all of the government and HSE guidelines about distances and social distancing, also to go out there and try. If you haven't been going out for walks or a bike ride or something in your community, start doing it now. Take little steps now so that you're kind of getting ready. If you have children who are going to be returning to creches or preschools, or they have after-school childminders, and you drive or you walk, go by where that is and have a look in. And there's probably nice things that you can see, like the playground or rainbows in the window, or it's probably an inviting building anyway. And so to go in and if you need to ring ahead and ask for permission to go in on the premises and walk around, that may or may not be appropriate, but if it is, but at least get close. So what I would be saying to people is start chipping at that eggshell that you've been living in and begin to step out. And if you feel kind of a bit of trepidation, if you feel a bit of fear, don't be hard on yourself. It's normal and it's natural. Just as we've made any other change, we have to get used to this again, and to be really to be kind for yourself. But to keep it simple, to start with walks, maybe stretch out your walk, maybe go to a new place. Our main streets are fairly quiet at the moment. To take a walk down and to practice that. It's a great time to practice all of the things that we're going to need our children to do, to keep a distance from others, to practice hand hygiene. And we can do it more easily now when they're with us and we're not dealing with crowds. It's going to be more of a challenge when they're in a group of 11-year-olds or 25 11-year-olds.
They're really very good at this, Peadar, aren't they? They're really very smart at. I find small children, especially primary school, because I have a little girl, and before the lockdown came, the schools were very good at teaching the children about the hand washing. They were opening doors with their elbows. Yes, they were kind of ahead of their parents with some of this stuff.
They were. I mean, kids who use our service were coming in here, and the handshake was the toe shake. So the tipping of the show, I think they called it the Wuhan handshake or something like that. And just the toe would go out and we would tip that. And that was nice. Children are really adaptive and they're very resilient and they take these things up really, really quickly. So just as schools introduced hand hygiene and all of that, our children will get used to normal again, or whatever the initial version is of normal is. Our children are very adaptable and they will get used to it. So I would say to a parent, be mindful that it's not your anxiety or your worries that you're modeling and passing on to your child. That's not a criticism, because we worry, we love our children and we worry about them. But at the same time, if you do find yourself, speaking negatively about society, about school, about crowds, about having to unlock and all of those kinds of stuff, kind of rein that back in again and look for the benefits and match the benefits up with the responsibilities. We'll have the freedom of having a match again. We'll have the freedom of a dance rehearsal again. But with that will come responsibilities. And so share them both. Don't focus on the negative if that's your general way of doing things.
Okay, we might take it back then to the basics of anxiety, because maybe some people are experiencing anxiety for the first time, because you described how maybe, it's something that some people have lived with, but maybe for some others they haven't, and that this pandemic and this juggling work and children at home, this and all of the other stresses that people are experiencing, they may have anxiety for the first time now, and their children as well.
Absolutely. And really what's happening for them is they're becoming aware of anxiety for the first time, because the prevalence of anxiety is 100%. We all experience anxiety. And if I could take a second just to talk about the difference between anxiety and stress, maybe. Stress is our response to something that's happening. I've gone home, there's no one at home, I don't have my keys. I've come into work and I'm missing a file I should have or something like that. What do I do? How do I react? It's a reaction. Anxiety is something that kind of lingers even after the situation has gone away. And it's normal and it's natural and it's actually really useful. It's our brain and our body's way of giving us that little bit of unease to kind of manage a misfortune or to manage something. It's also that kind of that tense energy we have to do the right thing. So it's that energy before an exam or a first date. So it's normal and natural and it's useful. And for some of us, it maybe wasn't a big deal. We were managing it. It was at a low level. It was helping us to get up and comb our hair and get to work on time and do those kinds of things. So if people are experiencing it for the first time, that's the first thing that I would say to them is, this isn't strange or weird. This is your brain and your body saying, I'm alert, I'm alive, I'm trying to mind myself, but I got to keep it in check. All of the pre-COVID stress control and anxiety management things, they're all still true. Taking perspective, not looking at the worst case scenario, getting good rest, getting good sleep, having a nice balance of work, rest, and play, getting exercise, all of those kinds of things. So don't be afraid of anxiety. There's a lovely study done by psychologists in California that looks at the idea of, if we just label anxiety as a message from our brain to get us to mind ourselves, it can really help to change our focus from, God, this is going to kill me, to, okay, so I have this anxiety, I have this challenge. What do I do about it? What would make it better for me? What would make it easier? And speak to whoever you're sharing the anxiety with. So if it's in a couple, if it's a parent and child, sit down and talk about it and find out what would make being dropped off at school easier or more pleasant, or what would make having to get back into a bedtime. For some children, it's getting back into their own beds. So lots of children have migrated during lockdown into their parents' beds. And it might be that, it might be just getting people back doing their routines, but certainly not being afraid of it.
Okay, that's really interesting, trying to get people back into their routine, because for some people they found a new routine. For others, everything is still a bit out of whack, and that's okay too, I take it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, we go on holidays, we have bank holiday weekends, we get a little fuzzy. And listen, that's good, because we love novelty. As a species, we love novelty, and it kind of keeps us on our toes. I've spotted something new, or I'm doing something new. But But when we find that routines have gone too far one direction, it is time to rein them back. So the kinds of things I would be looking at, for example, you might have a household where one person's going out to work and one person's working from home. So I would say there, maybe look at bedtimes. If you have adolescents who are gaming late at night, they're setting up these gaming parties with, I don't know, somebody in Toronto and somebody in Sydney, and time zones are keeping them up late. Just remind them that they have to rein that back in. It's disruptive for the whole household. And it isn't about making them be exactly replicate school. It isn't about that. It's about bringing it back as close as makes sense. It could be something as simple as we've kind of all started to eat separately rather than no, let's get back to the table, put the devices away, and our meal time, this one meal time, I'm going to focus on one thing this week, and it's dinner time. We're going to have our dinner together. And then after maybe a few days, we might look at something else. It might be a morning walk. It might be helping your child to have routines about caring for a pet or making their bed. Maybe some people are not making the bed as much because they don't have visitors. Maybe others are staying in their jammies all day. And listen, we can't judge people for that. But at the same time, we are moving in those phases. We're doing well and we're moving in those phases. So it's time to kind of, we're not going to get ready for school the night before. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to be where we start to integrate ourselves into normal routines and normal behaviors bit by bit. And I think we kind of need to embrace those phases as they move and make little changes ourselves as we go along.
Okay, and how we are in ourselves is important, I take it then as well, because you kind of touched on that with parents when you mean well, but you could be projecting your own anxieties on your child, which you don't want to turn them into little worriers.
No, you don't, and it would be unfair to do that. And listen, a lot of our kind of anxiety or worrying behaviors are mimicked by those in our family. I mean, we would often talk to the parent of an anxious child, and they would say, I'd say, "Are you a worrier?" and stuff, and say, "No, but I'd never drive on a rainy day," or something like that, and then say, "Well, where did you get it?" And they're talking, Granny gets blamed, but we do have to watch our behaviors. We do have to make sure that there's a nice balance between describing things that are negative and positive, so that we're not, stuck in, cloud cuckoo land. But at the same time, we're looking for a fairly optimistic view on life. We're talking about the weather, how beautiful it is. I've noticed in my neighborhood now that there's a couple of the tidy townspeople out and about already, distancing, picking up a lot of gloves, I might add. But they're out there and they've begun already. So it might be something like acknowledging that. You don't have to necessarily do it, but saying, "Isn't that nice that our neighbors do that?" Or "Look how they're able to do that and keep apart." So it's possible to go back. So also to be aware about how we kind of describe our own anxiety. So it's not necessarily the worst thing to tell your child you're worried or anxious or something you have to do is going to be a challenge, but let them know how you're going to cope. Maybe I'm going to prepare. A good example might be, someone's being asked to, I don't know, read at a family wedding or something like this. And, "Oh, I'd never do that. I turn scarlet. I won't be able to pronounce all those funny words in readings." And say to your child, "But this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to practice. You're going to be my audience." And let them know that you do have that coping side to you, that we're not always. But also, if you do have anxiety and you find as an adult or as a parent that your anxiety is a little bit crippling, maybe now's the time to seek out a little bit of advice or help. There is help out there. I mean, it could be something like Aware. It could be looking up the Irish Association for Anxiety. It could be looking up tips on a really good website, like, for example, like aware.ie, or like, for example, anxietycanada.ca is a really, really good website for people to get information on anxiety. Or even maybe to consider, I kind of dealt with this long enough. It's been in the background. I'm going to talk to my GP, because there's counseling in primary care that is free of charge via our GPs. And people need to know about these things. But it's funny about anxiety for parents and adults. It's almost become okay to talk about it now with COVID. It's one of the things that's come from it. It is okay to talk about your worries and your anxieties now, which I think is a really, really positive thing.
It's great, and you've signposted us to great resources there as well, those websites. And just to finish on the teenagers, because we're facing into a bank holiday weekend, and I'm somebody who has to go out because I'm still working, so there's a certain amount of having to travel to and from work, and I've noticed that there's very few people actually out, but it gets amplified somewhat. So if there is one gang of teenagers down by the river yesterday, it becomes a huge issue in people's minds. I know it's not ideal, but there are a lot of teenagers that are doing the right thing. But for the minority maybe that are getting fed up of being cocooned, and for the parents trying to manage that, any advice for us for the bank holiday, how to keep them safe at home, entertained at home, and not missing their pals so much?
Absolutely. I have 2 teenagers at home myself, and I have to give them lots of credit because to some extent they must be bored out of their trees. But so what I like to think about is managing risk with adolescents. So I would say to the general public is try not to be too harsh on the few that are hanging out together. It's difficult for them. They're impulsive. They really crave peer interaction. They're at a time in their life where it's healthy and normal to crave peer interaction. These are the people they're going to spend the rest of their lives with and partner with and all of the rest. So it is very, very difficult for them. But think of it as a risk. And I mean risk in a positive way. And the best way to try to think of it is you can't get rid of risk, usually. You can't get rid of, but we can manage risk. So you might be saying to your adolescent, you know what? A compromise is that you have 2 friends over, that you socially distance, you're at different points in the garden, and I'll give you the freedom of the garden to be out there. We can't have 6, we can't have 8, but we can have 2 people maybe that are close friends that we have contact with. It could be where you sit down with your adolescent, you talk to them about the risks and about your concerns and ask them what they would give another adolescent as advice. So they're very good at giving other people advice. So they'll come up with better suggestions if it's about somebody else. But I think that we need to have a lot of empathy for them because we're asking a lot of them. This is a time in their life where it's crucial to be out there and to be social and to remember when we're saying no to them, how hard it is for them to hear that. And remember when they do cooperate, how hard it was for them to cooperate, and to make sure that we praise them, we give them a hug, we give them, we give them some praise for what they've done, and we thank them, for cooperating and making things easier. But I would say to parents, come up with a plan with your teenager for the weekend. Ask them if they have any expectations about the weekend. Ask them if they think that that's realistic. Help them to see that some of those expectations might not be realistic, but how they could have some level of fun, how they could do something. And they might set up a Zoom like this and have a quiz. As I said before, they might meet 1 or 2 people. If you have the space, if you have a big garden or you have space around, sit on the wall and have a chat and share whatever. But try to meet them some way, because a key of parenting in adolescence is that we're willing to compromise at some level.
That lovely word, compromise. So on that note, Peadar, we leave it there for our session this evening, but thank you very much for all your information, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Yes. Mind yourself. Take care.